What's up, everybody? It's JT Sports and you guys with another video. This video, I'm here with my Minnesota Vikings 2019 training camp preview. I'm going to be previewing the Minnesota Vikings team and roster going into training camp for them in 2019. Going to be giving you guys some players to watch, some position battles, and some analysis on the Minnesota Vikings for their training camp 2019. Now, before I begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Upload NFL videos and NFL content daily, and help me get to 3,000 subscribers. So I'm really close to 3,000 subscribers. I'm less than 50 subscribers away from getting 3,000. So please help the channel grow and hit 3,000 subscribers by subscribing to the channel. Now, the Minnesota Vikings, 2018, really disappointed me. I thought this was a team that could end up winning the Super Bowl. I actually had them, if you're an OG subscriber of the channel, which a lot of you guys watching this video are probably not. I had the Minnesota Vikings going to the Super Bowl last season, but they ended up missing the playoffs barely. And a big reason for that was because nobody knew that the Minnesota Vikings offensive line was going to be as bad as it was last season. Their offensive line wasn't really that good. It held back the running game a lot, which was a big reason why they had to rely on Kirk Cousins a little bit more than what they wanted to. And then that also affected Kirk Cousins because, listen, the Minnesota Vikings were giving up pressure to four-man fronts. Guys didn't even have to send any blitzes. They were basically getting pressure on the Minnesota Vikings with just the four guys who they had lined up front. So anytime your offensive line allows pressure without blitzes or just with four guys, that's a problem. So Minnesota, they addressed their offensive line. I think their offensive line should be a lot better than what it was last season. I really like the addition of Garrett Bradbury. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to end up having a very big impact on his Minnesota offensive line really quick. And I think he can have a Quentin Nelson-like impact or something close to it. I think he's going to be a really big part of his offensive line, and I think he's going to help improve his offensive line tremendously. So other than the offensive line, this Minnesota Vikings team is pretty good, pretty solid. Basically, other than the offensive line, they're pretty stacked at every position. Wide receiver, they have a little bit of a controversy there because we're interested in seeing who's going to end up starting at that wide receiver 3 spot. Because we know Laquan Treadwell has been pretty much a bust up until this point, hasn't really lived up to his potential, and you got guys like Chad Bieber, Jordan Taylor, Brandon Zessler. You got Laquan Treadwell as well. Then you got Dylan Mitchell. I think Dylan Mitchell is going to be a little bit of a sleeper there. I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up starting at that wide receiver 3 spot for the Minnesota Vikings. So basically, this position battle is really wide open. Anybody could start at that third wide receiver spot. It's up for grabs. So it's going to be interesting throughout the Minnesota Vikings training camp in 2019 and who ends up starting at that wide receiver 3 spot for the Minnesota Vikings. So as we know, there are other receivers, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen. We already know about them. They're sensational. They're one of the best receiving duos in the NFL. Then we look at the halfback 2 spots. So we got to see who's going to be the backup behind Dalvin Cook. So we have Alexander Madison, who is a rookie halfback out of Boise State. If you guys haven't watched any Alexander Madison highlights, I encourage you to do so. This guy reminds me a lot of Jay Ajayi. Very powerful. Isn't a guy who's going to burn you with blazing speed and things like that, but he's very patient, hit the holes well. Just reminds me a lot of Jay Ajayi. Very powerful, kind of like a freight train. So I really like him a lot. You got Mike Boone. You got Amir Abdullah is a guy who's very fast as well. Also is very solid in the pass catching game as well. So it's going to be interesting seeing who ends up being that backup halfback behind Dalvin Cook. And when it comes to Dalvin Cook, I'm expecting a lot out of Dalvin Cook this season. I think he should be able to hit 1,000 yards rushing. The offensive line really held him back because we already knew his rookie season, this guy went absolutely bananas. He went bonkers his rookie season before he ended up suffering that season-ending injury that year of his rookie season. So last year was a little bit of a disappointment held back by the offensive line. But the offensive line does take steps forward, which I believe that it will. And I think Dalvin Cook will end up returning to how he was before he got that injury his rookie season. And I think he could absolutely have a very solid season for the Minnesota Vikings this year. So now that we're done on the offensive side of the ball, let's talk about some position battles on the defense side of the ball. So at the defense tackle position, that's pretty much the biggest position battle that I'm going to talk about in this video. Now you got Hercules Mentafoa. Got undrafted out of Washington State a season ago. I'm really excited about seeing what he does for the Minnesota Vikings. I'm really surprised that when I was researching facts for this video that people actually considered him being in this position battle for that defensive tackle spot simply for the fact that he was listed as one of a outside linebacker or something like that. So it's really interesting seeing them try to move him to defensive tackle. He gained some weight as well, so he's a lot bigger than what he was a season ago. And I really like Hercules. This guy for Washington State was one of the most underrated defensive prospects in that draft class, in my opinion. And I think it's going to be really interesting seeing if he can end up winning that defensive tackle spot there. You also got Amar Watts there. You got Jalen Holmes, and you got Stephen Shamar. I'm going to be really interested in seeing who ends up starting that defensive tackle spot, and whoever doesn't end up starting, who's going to end up to be a good rotational guy at that defensive tackle position. So really interesting there at the defensive tackle spot. Then cornerbacks Xavier Rhodes, Trey Waynes, not much of a position battle, but two guys who really need to bounce back from pretty disappointing 2018 campaigns, guys who have been rumored to be expendable. The Vikings have said that well, articles that have came out this off season that the Vikings are reportedly interested or would not give out or give away the idea of trading away Xavier Rhodes or Trey Waynes. So those guys are pretty much expendable. Xavier Rhodes coming off of a very disappointing 2018 after he got a big contract extension. He's going to be a guy who's going to have to prove himself in 2019. I'm not going to say that he's not one of the best cornerbacks in the NFL because I do think he's a top 10 cornerback, and it's going to be interesting seeing him bounce back from a pretty disappointing 2018 campaign. Also, Trey Waynes as well. Trey Waynes is another guy who's going to have to bounce back from a pretty disappointing 2018 season as well. So it's going to be interesting seeing those two guys bounce back. Then we're going to jump back to the offensive side of the ball. Kyle Rudolph and Irv Smith, that tight end position is going to be really, really interesting. Kyle Rudolph was a guy who many people thought could end up getting traded by the Minnesota Vikings, but they ended up re-signing him, giving him an extension there as well. Irv Smith was a guy who they drafted in this year's NFL draft. I thought he was one of the best tight ends in this NFL's draft because I thought he was the third best tight end. He's a guy who can do a lot with the ball in his hands, very shifty. When you watch a film on him for Alabama, he's a guy who made a lot of plays with the ball in his hands, which is something that you don't really see out of tight ends a lot. You don't really see tight ends as shifty as Irv Smith. This guy is able to elude a lot of defenders, a lot of linebackers. Has good size, very good hands. His hands are very, very reliable. I thought he had one of the better hands out of all the tight ends going into this year's draft class. So Irv Smith is a guy that I'm going to be interested in watching for the Minnesota Vikings, and also Kyle Rudolph as well, and seeing how they get those two involved in the offense for the Minnesota Vikings. So now I'm going to be talking about my players to watch for the Minnesota Vikings going into training camp. Going to be interested in watching Garrett Bradbury. He's a guy who I thought was one of the better offensive linemen in this year's draft class. Going to be really interesting at that center spot. That center position is probably one of the most important spots in all of football because the center is basically the quarterback of the offensive line. So you have a pretty solid center, then your offensive line should end up being pretty solid. Most teams that have good centers have pretty good offensive lines. So Garrett Bradbury, going to be interesting in seeing his success there at that center position. Also the whole entire offensive line as a whole because our offensive line was not really that good. So I'm going to be looking forward and keeping my eyes on the whole entire offensive line and seeing how they perform during training camp for the Minnesota Vikings in 2019. Then I'm going to be interested in seeing Irv Smith, like I said earlier, very shifty, very elusive for a tight end. You don't really see a tight end who has this ability to, with how he eludes defenders with the ball in his hands, how he's able to make plays with the ball in his hands. You don't really see that a lot of the tight ends that are able to make a lot of defenders miss, like how Irv Smith was able to do when he was playing for Alabama. So it's going to be interesting seeing him there. Then you got Alexander Madison. He was a guy who I'm really intrigued in out of Boise State. Didn't really see a lot of Boise State games, but I caught a couple of them. And the Alexander Madison, good size, reminds me a lot of Jay Ajayi, who has also played for Boise State as well during college. And those guys are pretty similar in their playing styles. not guys who are going to burn you with their speed, but guys who are able to move the chains and very good getting those yards after contact. And also Xavier Rhodes. How does Xavier Rhodes bounce back from a very disappointing 2018 season? So this is it for my Minnesota Vikings 2019 training camp preview. Let me know about some things that you guys are going to be watching out of the Minnesota Vikings when they begin their training camp as well. Also, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I upload NFL videos and NFL content daily. Also, make sure to check out some of these other videos as well. And thanks for watching.